website said lenders, realtors, and other partners, and so I took that to mean partners in the home buying process. So I'll touch on appraisers, which is a great challenge for land trust folks, home inspectors, title companies, and also funding partners, not getting the funding, because that's a whole nother huge conversation, but once you have the funding, oftentimes with the funding comes documents that have to be signed and at closing and are part of the purchase transaction. So you have to have a relationship with somebody who can help you track those documents. So those are the kind of broad outline. Are there any other partnerships that folks were hoping, like, oh, I'm going to talk, make sure we cover this relationship in the home buying process in addition to those? So, okay. So, so just to start out, so I'm Jim Philbin. I'm the Community Land Trust Program Director at One Roof Community Housing. I mentioned yesterday, but since people come and go to different sessions, just a 2-minute on One Roof. So we started out as Northern Communities Land Trust in the early 90s, and so the only thing we did was community land trust, single family home ownership. And one of our partners working in Duluth for many years was Neighborhood Housing Services of Duluth. They did the home buyer education classes, they did rehab, home improvement loan lending, some community organizing, and in 10 years ago in 2012, we merged with Neighborhood Housing Services, and then they kind of incorporated into the land trust. And at that time, we changed our name to One Roof Community Housing. But it's a continuation of the Northern Community Land Trust. And actually, it's an example of kind of learning as you go, but we were originally thinking that NHS would dissolve. But then we realized that we could keep it, and it made more sense to keep it, and it's now the CDFI for our lending portion of our organization. So anyway, but I've always been with the land trust side of things. So the land trust, it used to just be all we did, is now a program within One Roof Community Housing that does a number of these other activities, all related in some way to home and housing. Home buyer education and counseling, home improvement loans, home repairs, home equity loans, tenant landlord mediation. We've done some multifamily supportive housing for rentals, assistance, so kind of everything across the gamut there. But since this is focused on land trust, and that's what I know, that's what we're going to be talking about. But just to give you an idea, I know we have folks at all levels of experience. So I came in 22 years ago, completely green, and my prior work before starting at the Land Trust, I was worked with homeless youth. I was a teacher, a campus minister. I was most recently been part of the Catholic worker community where you live with homeless people, and I came to Duluth, and one of the people that, in trying to get connected with the job, I connected with the person who started the Catholic worker community in Duluth. His name's Steve O'Neill, and he said, well, one of the former Catholic worker members here he's the executive director of this little nonprofit called Northern Community Land Trust, so, why don't you meet with him and maybe that could work. So I met with Jeff, and Jeff is now presenting in the next session on organizational sustainability, as he's been at One Roof for 25 years or so. And he said, it's just me, we don't hardly have any money, but I did secure an AmeriCorps position for a year, and hopefully if things work out, that could maybe become a permanent job. And I said, well, I've been a Catholic worker, and I didn't make any money doing that, so $600 a month is like, yes, that's a high living, So my illustrious career began as an AmeriCorps at Northern Community Land Trust with just Jeff and I. And as I joked in the introduction, literally we had one phone line with a dial-up internet, and if you wanted to call somebody, you had to check, like, can you get off your email, Jeff, so I can make a phone call, And so I knew nothing about land trust, I knew nothing about housing, knew nothing about finance, nothing. And it's just, he was a good guy, and it seemed like a good mission, and it helped people. Like, well, that sounds great. It sounds like a good thing to do. And about maybe 2-3 weeks in of learning about the land trust and having Jeff explain things to me, he said, "Well, you are now the third most knowledgeable person about community land trust in the state of Minnesota." I was like, wow, all right, this is great. And I say that because it really is true. Like, we can feel intimidated if we're coming from a nonprofit, human services, I want to do good in the world, I want to help people perspective, which I think we all are. And so I know I was intimidated by lenders and financing and business people and realtors and title companies and I don't know, right? But I did know community land trusts, and realizing even in my short time, I knew more than anybody else in the city of Duluth other than Jeff. And that gave me some confidence to take those first steps out, right? That's been super helpful to realize that, not to cede that knowledge to other people. We can be the experts on community land trusts, and they're the experts on lending or realty or legal title or whatever, but we have our important role to play. And the other, I would say, sort of guiding principle and expression my mom would use is, you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar, right? So, it wasn't a sense of, right, we're going to be combative and we're going to, demand what we need, and we're going to, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies kind of approach. We just want something good to happen, and I know you do too, so let's work together to make this happen. And you're competent, and I am too, and we're going to make it work. The only downside with that analogy is that it treats people as flies, but aside from that, I think it's good. Just say that because it wasn't as if I did not come in at all with, I had all these connections. I knew everybody. I just moved to Duluth from the Pacific Northwest, and no connections, knew nothing about housing development, realty, finance. Okay, so we really had to build these relationships from the ground up. We were a very small nonprofit at that time. It was just Jeff and I and the board of directors, and we had 8 or 10 homes in the land trust, and our production was, we had first partnership was with the local community college in their building construction program. And so they would build 2 houses a year, over the course of the school year, and it was super exciting. We had a big groundbreaking at the start and a big celebration in June at the end, and then all year to get 2 home buyers ready, to buy a home, and that was a huge accomplishment, and it was. And so, not to minimize it at all. And that's kind of how it started. Then, we should be able to do more than 2 a year, and then we began to take different approaches. But you realize very early on that if we have to be good at the thing we do, but we have to have good relationships with all the other components that make it work. Like, it's not a standalone, we can't just create affordable housing, no matter how earnest and tireless we are, if we don't have partnerships. Again, I'll kind of just run through some of the ways that we develop them, and then ask for folks' feedback on what they've done that they found to be successful too. So maybe I'll start with lenders, and just for I'd be interested to hear what lenders, for the people that do work with community land trusts, mortgage financing, which lenders lend to your home buyers? So who do you have that?
Alaris Mortgage, let's see. US Bank, Bremer. Yeah, Mortgages Unlimited, and there's, True Stone Financial.
Wow, so that's 5 or 6, right?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
How about this table? Anyone?
I think we have 7 now, and they're all the same as that, and I can't remember the other
Yeah,
2.
okay.
Yeah, we're at 7.
Bremer and Summit.
Remember
In
Summit?
Lake
It's Lake
area.
area.
And we're
And
starting with Bell.
is there a summit?
Yeah, he said Summit
Oh, he said
and Belvin.
Bill?
Okay. True stuff.
Any additional ones from?
Well, right now, we're just rural development. We got
Yeah.
approved with rural development,
Okay.
and we're still trying to break through to our lenders, our local lenders.
Any additional ones back there?
We got Next Mortgage, which is national, and then our local ones, we got Starian and Choice Bank and Gate City Bank. They're all local.
So that alone, to me, is incredible, right? Because 22 years ago, we had one lender who was willing to give it a try, and the idea that there would be 20 different lenders doing mortgages for community land trust buyers would have, no way, that'll never happen, you know? So
Are those all banks?
they are, I think, at least the ones that we work with are banks. So you got,
Next Mortgage isn't,
Okay.
but otherwise it's banks.
But the ones who aren't banks, private lenders, or?
Yeah, and that one we haven't used yet. We were looking for a tri-compliant lender, and that's our kind of checks the box solution, but we won't be using them long term.
and so we started out with a local bank, the North Shore Bank of Commerce in Duluth, Family Bank. And Jeff, met with them and said, we have this new product, this community land trust product, and we need a first mortgage lender, what do you think? And they said, well, this fits in with our mission of helping folks, and, we'll figure out, that's what we do, we figure things out, we haven't done, that before, but, and our state housing finance agency, Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, has for years and years had a mortgage product that then local banks around the state essentially administer. So North Shore Bank, the local Duluth bank, then used this Minnesota Housing Finance Agency product for us. And we've been using it ever since. But not only that, that was the start of a incredibly awesome, now almost 30-year relationship with this local bank in Duluth. And they could not have foreseen the organization we would become. We couldn't have foreseen it. They just said, well, we'll figure out this new thing and figure out how to do mortgage on leased land. When others said, no, we don't want to touch that. A, we don't want to put the time in to figure it out. B, you have like 2 homes, there's no volume, it's not worth our time, those kind of obstacles. So North Shore is now done 500 mortgages for our land trust buyers over the years, and it was a great investment from them, from their point of view, right from the start. We've always had some of their senior staff on our board of directors, and we've gotten to develop close relationships with their loan officers, and that personal connection has been hugely important. It's kind of obvious in common sense, but yes, just getting the mortgage approved is the minimum, but having the relationship with the loan officer that we're going to try to figure this out, because if you've done it any length of time, there's always obstacles or things that come up or things that change in the process, especially when you add in this community land trust element to it. So I can't tell you how many times that the loan officers have said, I love working with the land trust buyers. They are my favorite clients, right? They're excited, they're the first time buyers, they're many of them didn't think they could ever buy a home. And, you know, they're often, you know, so the same loan officer, especially in the early days, you know, their mortgages might be $50,000 or something, and they'd also be working with mortgages of $500,000, you know, but they gave that same time and attention and care to the folks in our program, and actually found that more satisfying and enjoyable for their work. And again, they've said that many, many times. And I had to get over the idea like, you know, I'm bothering them, such small potatoes, and, you know, they're bank and they know things I don't know, and, you know, I'll try to be as, you know, least obtrusive as possible. And instead of saying, you know, wow, this is this great opportunity, once I realized for this loan officer, for them to feel a sense of mission in the work that they do. And that kind of helped me kind of reframe that relationship a bit and really see it as a partnership, because then, you know, we just have fun phone conversations with them. It sounds funny, but like, you know, it was fun to talk to a loan officer. They're like, okay, what else do you need? All right, so, you know, okay, now explain this to me. Why do you need this thing? What is the good faith estimate? And, you know, what does it do? And what if it's different than the final? How does that work? You know, and you didn't have to feel. I felt comfortable asking questions, right? And so that's I think important part of the relationship is we shouldn't feel like we have to know everything about everything, right? So if we can go in and just be honest and say, I don't get this aspect of this transaction and why you're doing it this way, can you explain that to me? But knowing that we have the knowledge on the land trust side of things, and then we would get the same thing back. Well, now how come you're structured this way than that way? I don't get that. Explain to me why you do that way. So then it was a mutual relationship rather than a up-down relationship. And so then, of course, it's not just the loan officer, but then it's the loan processor. Like, it's all the different steps along the way. Oh, can we need to, you know, because they're verifying the income, and then I'm verifying the income, and well, how did you calculate that? Or they're a little bit over the way I do it. Well, how did you do it? Oh, well, we count it this way, and, you know, and having those kind of conversations. And it changed it from like just a sort of arm's length business transaction of just get the deal done to this is an extension of Northern Queens Land Trust staff in my mind, you know. And I would tease them about that, but you know, that they were super helpful in that way. And partly it was a local bank, smaller bank, you know, it wasn't the big giant national one, and so, you know, there's certain reasons for that. But they still were a bank, you know, they weren't just they weren't in to make money and professional, and still had the rules and everything that had to be, they couldn't just do things just for the land trust because we were nice and had a good mission, you know, we still had to meet all these very strict criteria along the way. So they were our first lender, they've been our longest term lender, they've done the most loans, and we have the most long-term relationship with is North Shore Bank. And we also recognize, as great as that was, it's not prudent to just have one option for our buyers. And because what if for some reason they couldn't access Minnesota Housing's mortgage product anymore? Minnesota Housing stopped doing one, and we literally would have no program going forward. So then we're kind of in the early 2000s, trying to find some additional first mortgage options for the land trust buyers. And again, that's why I love that there's so many now. But it was really an uphill battle initially, again, because it was this lease land model and you know, the whole issue was the kind of foreclosure. The land stayed with this little nonprofit, the bank didn't get it, which was the point, right? We were very clear on that, like this is the mission, this is why we do it this way. We're not gonna give you the land, we own it. And so, but there was some, you know, resistance because of that. And interestingly, when we did eventually have some foreclosures, because that will happen when you serve a large enough number of folks, the banks it worked just like we theoretically thought it would. And that's always great when you have this, like, I think this is how it should work, and then it works that way, but which is you'd have a foreclosure and some investor would like, oh, see the house at this price, it would be super low. Like, oh, well, we'll get it. And then they figure out, okay, what's this land lease thing? And wait, I don't own the land, and they have to consent to it, and all these additional things that prevented this outside investor from swooping up and grabbing it. And then the bank's like, well, imagine to sell it back to the land trust because they already own the land, and then they can turn it around. So that ownership of the land really did give us the kind of legal standing and leverage against, you know, huge banks and outside investors to steward our properties. But so we recognized that, and so one of the things that at the very beginning with the North Shore Bank, the Minnesota Housing was just for first-time home buyers, which initially was fine because that's who we were serving and we didn't really think much about it. But then we started to encounter, you know, a woman who was divorced who, you know, their ex left her, they'd owned a home a year ago and she was high and dry and starting all over again, but she was no longer a first-time home buyer and basically in the same position as all of our other folks. And so, how can we help this person? So that's when we reached out to Wells Fargo and US Bank. They, as we joke, they have to do lending to low-income folks, right? That's sort of this requirement. I remember I asked him one time, one of the loan officers, now, why do you do this? He's like, oh, we have to. You know, like, okay, well, at least you're honest about it. But, you know, so they have to do a certain number of loans to, you know, lower income folks, and they have to have a program for that. So, you know, we said, well, we have our whole client base, 100% falls under this, under 80% of AMI, and we're a perfect fit for you. And you just have to get over this lease land piece. It shouldn't be that much of a barrier. One thing that helped us in Minnesota was Minnesota Power owned this land in Island Lake, which is half hour outside Duluth. High-end homes, but Minnesota Power owned the land under it. So the concept of leased land at least was known. There was no, you know, resale restrictions or income restrictions. It was a totally different purpose, but at least, you know, the land was leased. So they're like, well, kind of like that Minnesota Power lease land. Oh, maybe we could do that. So US Bank had we call a portfolio loan product, which means it's their own product. It's not some external thing that they held it, called American Dream. Probably a lot of folks have worked with that. And so that became available to our buyers. And then Wells Fargo, for a time, had this CDMP, Community Development Mortgage product, that was sort of parallel to US Bank's American Dream, again, for low income, under 80% of AMI. And so there were some Wells Fargo ones as well. And they could serve non-first-time buyers, and you know, we have 3 lenders, and like, this is great. We have multiple options because they had some different credit score requirements and different how they would count debt or student loans, or obviously, as you know, it's good to have more options. So we we connected with our local US Bank and Wells Fargo people in Duluth, and had good relationships. But it wasn't as cozy as our North Shore Bank one, but we still valued it because it was another option for our buyers. And Wells Fargo subsequently dropped out. They stopped doing their affordable mortgage product for some reason, so they left US Bank estate, and we've had them in the whole time too, and they've done a number of loans for our buyers through their American Dream product. And the same loan officer, when I was mentioning, that the homebuyer education classes that neighborhood housing services taught, that they would have me come in as the land trust rep to talk about the land trust. Troy from US Bank would come in 22 years ago talking about the American Dream loan product, which was actually how I met him. And well, could the land trust work with your American Dream? He's like, well, I don't know, I guess we can ask. So now I've been working with Troy for 22 years doing mortgages with American Dream. So the, so it, you, the great part about having many options for our mortgage financing now is there's many options for buyers to choose from. The downside sort of might be just it's harder to develop relationships with 8 different lenders in the way that we did with our one. It doesn't mean you should just give up on that, but I certainly found there have been times where some deals went through because of relationship. I don't mean like they did anything illegal, of course, but just we were able to figure out some things like, oh, actually, we thought this was going to kill the deal. We looked into it further. You raised some good questions. We checked this out, and we can do it. Or, that kind of thing. And that's been huge, right, to be able to have that connection. And I guess the last thing I'll say about lenders before we jump over to realtors is, and this again might be different, but is trying to, we realized we had to be really clear when we talk about what is the price of the home, because the whole land trust model is you are selling it at a discounted price. That's the point. It's sold below market value to make it affordable to folks. And so we would talk about what's the home price. Well, that's the land trust price, the price of the buyer's paying, right? But our funders required that the home be sold at the market value, like that would actually be what would show up on a settlement statement, closing disclosure, would be the full market value of the home, and then this affordability gap subsidy, or the difference between the market value and what you actually sold the home for, would show up as a credit to the buyer. So we learned early on, we would say, here's the market value, it's going to be 125. We're bringing 30,000 affordability gap. The buyers needs a mortgage of 95. So we would kind of lay out those numbers, and then it was clearer. And the other huge advantage of that was it avoided mortgage insurance for the buyers. Right, that was another key piece when we got started. It was like, how are we going to? What's attractive about this to a prospective buyer? Right, it has to be a good enough deal. So that difference between the market value and the land trust program price, whatever you guys call that, whatever your term is, but that we always said it has to be at least 20% because it has to be a good enough deal for the buyer to give up some of the equity later, and then it takes away mortgage insurance, right? So that functions as their down payment. So in that example, they're putting $30,000 down on a $125,000 house. Even though $30,000 wasn't their money, it still counted towards their down payment, and that worked out awesomely. And so then we have almost never had to have mortgage insurance. Yeah.
What did you call it? What did you call it? You said something gap.
Oh, affordability gap. Yeah.
Thanks.
And that's there's a distinction. All these terms that I never thought I would know, but. So affordability gap is that difference between what the home appraises at as a market value, just what's the unrestricted market value, and what the buyer can afford, or how much subsidy you bring. But then there's also the value gap, or sometimes we'll call it developer gap, where it might cost you $250,000 to develop the property, either build it or acquire it and renovate it. But if you're working in low-income neighborhoods or in distressed parts of town, it might cost you $250 to develop it, but it's only going to be worth $175 when you're done. And of course, no private builder or contractor is going to be like, well, I'm not going to do that. It doesn't make any sense at all. How would that even work? But it's a nonprofit. We can raise that value gap, the difference between the $250 it costs to develop the project and the $175 it's worth. So we're working on both sides all the time, getting value gap and affordability gap. I completely leave out the value gap issue with our mortgage lenders because it's of no importance at all, and don't bring it up, it doesn't even matter. It's just what's the home appraised at and what mortgage the buyer needs to get. So, yeah.
At what point do you give that appraisal? I'm going through a construction project right now with the CLT, and it's my first
Yeah.
rodeo. So we're trying to figure out, at first we were saying the value of the house was the AMI level value, and they're like, you're gonna have PMI, it's too high leverage. And we realized that we could take credit for the market value. When do you formalize that? We'll need an appraisal for the construction, but then do you do one up front and then another one when the buyer's ready?
Yes. So for our new construction, we would have an appraisal of, and we could say, here's the specs of the home, this is what's being built, the size, everything in the lot, and so tell us how much it's going to be worth when it's built. So we would know that going into it. And then when the buyer got his or her mortgage financing, you hoped that buyer's appraisal would at least be pretty close to the one we had. Of course, there's some headaches with that. You're like, why is this one $20,000 less than the appraisal we got when we, which is a whole other issue. But I'll talk a little bit about appraisal when we get to that section. But that's how we did it there. With what we call our acquisition rehab resales, where we acquire an existing home that needs work, we renovate it, and then we sell it. But now it's a newly renovated home. For many years, we said, well, we know the market well enough. We work in the same neighborhoods in Duluth over and over and over again. We know what these homes are worth. So we would just say, this home has a market value of $150, and lo and behold, the appraisal will come in at $150. So, but then recently, and that's why you're just always changing and adapting. Recently, Minnesota Housing said, well, how do you know the market value is $150 without an appraisal? Well, because we're a realtor and we do this all the time. We know the neighbors are like, no, you need to have an appraisal before you list it. We're like, oh my gosh, all right. So that was another $500, right? So now, when we finish our rehab of our home, before we put it on the market, I have to get an appraisal to say, this is what it's worth now, and then, and so then you could say, now I can say instead of just has a market value, one it has a appraised market value of 150. So that's that piece of it, and maybe I'll actually go into appraisers next rather than realtors, but it kind of ties in more directly.
Can I ask you one more question there?
Yeah.
If it's 100 is what they qualify for, 150 is the market, are you booking 150 as the sale?
Yes. So, in that, it all intersects, because that also ties with the realtor side of things. And we have to accept a certain amount of, what's the word, like, constant explaining of things, I guess, for lack of better words, right? Because you can make a case, well, look, if the buyer in their head thinks they're paying 100, your profit, your development is based on a sale price of 100, their mortgage is 100, then just put $100,000 in the purchase agreement, and we're all in agreement, it's $100,000, right? And so we actually did that originally in the early days, but then the appraiser would get the purchase agreement and be like, it's only selling for 100, but it's worth way more than that, I don't get that. But then again, our funder said, well, we need to distinguish, we need to know how much affordability gap you need, and the only way we can determine what that is what it's actually worth. If it was an unrestricted home on the open market, what would it be worth? So then we thought, okay, but if we advertise the homes at $150,000, then people aren't going to look at them because they say, well, I can't put $150,000. So they just would skip over our homes. Like, this conundrum, right? So what we settled on was we advertised them on our website, in all of our communications at the land trust price, $100,000 in this example. And buyer's like, what are you paying for this house? I'm paying $100,000 for this house. And then when it comes to the purchase agreement, we'd say, okay, you're still paying 100. Your actual cost is 100, but we have to write it up for what the home's really worth, and then we subsidize that difference. And at first I always felt a bit like, it sounds sort of like bait and switch, like, I thought I was paying 100 and now I'm paying 150, what kind of a program is this, you know? But then again, you have to trust that, no, this is we have integrity, we're not taking advantage of people, we're actually benefiting them by doing it this way, they don't pay mortgage insurance. And just getting used to explaining that, like okay, that's fine, makes sense. And then I put on there, buyer's effective cost is still $100,000. I try to spell it out as simply as possible.
What if your affordability gap, if the buyer only qualifies for, say, 20,000, not the full 50,000, so they're actually paying 130,000?
Yeah, so that was another conundrum, and hopefully that brings anybody from Minnesota housing here. We've had this constant rub with them. So their whole thing, and I get it, they're funder, like they're trying to use their money as prudently as possible, is we just want to use the minimum amount that the buyer needs, this particular one buyer that they need. And we don't want to give them more than they need, we just want to give them just enough of what they need. We're like, okay, but we're not just serving this one buyer, we are serving every buyer that comes after them. That's the whole point of the model, and if we start at a higher price, then the resale going forward every time on this house forever is going to be at this higher price. Well, blah, 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 you know, and so back and forth, but plus, it's impossible to market a home that says, the home will be somewhere between 100 and 150,000, just depends on a bunch of things. You
What
know?
can you pay?
Yeah,
How much
right.
money do you
Yeah,
have?
what do you
What do you want?
So, yeah, you could just say, well, here's how much do you make? Just tell me. So, we're very clear, like, we are going to sell it for as low as we can, and we know that because our target market was people earning 60% of their median income, right? Our limit was 80%, but we didn't want to sell it to people at 80 because then you're only serving the tiniest top of that limit. But if we're targeting 60, then that's what we aimed at. And so what would be the biggest problem? Like, oh, it's too affordable for this family that's making $25,000. It's like that's what you're worried about, that they could have afforded another $60 a month in a house payment. Like, why? Why? So we really kind of held our ground on that, and one workaround we've done is, which kind of ties into that value gap, affordability gap. If you use Minnesota housing money for affordability gap, then they have the buyer's debt to income ratio has to be at least 25% of their income, right? Because if it was 22% of their income, it would be a tragedy, for the state. So, so we said, well, what if we use your money for value gap? Like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter what buyer. Like, oh, okay, So then we started using Minnesota Housing's money for value gap, and even though 99% of the time their buyer's debt to income ratio is still well within their range, but sometimes you'll have a household that's near the top of their income limits, but they have medical debt, they have any number of reasons why they can't afford a high mortgage, but their income would seem to indicate that they could, and so then their housing ratio, and by housing ratio what I mean is their principal, interest, property taxes, and homeowners insurance, PITI, that payment had to be at least 25% of their gross income. And of course the home buyers would say, well, I don't even make that gross income, I don't make, as we know, 2/3 of that. Why do they count the gross? Why not the net income? Well, that's how they do it. But so another reason I said, well, why not then let us count 25% of their net income? No, it has to be gross. So anyway, so you're always in this, you're trying to comply with the funders because they're giving you absolutely critical money to make the whole thing work, and not sacrificing the mission and really being an advocate for the homeowners. Without doing anything, obviously, nefarious with the funding, you have to still comply with what they say. So So that's how we've set it up, is on our website and like that, yeah.
And real quick, you're saying using it for the value gap,
Yep.
so that's saying after you do the construction, it's not worth
What it costs you to
what it
build.
costs to build it, so you use the money for that
Yeah.
instead of making it more affordable to the buyer.
Not instead of, but we use that pool of money for the value gap. And then
Okay.
we use a different pool of money for the affordability gap.
Okay.
Because we still need to have the affordability gap to make
Okay.
the land trust model work. And so then we can
Thank you.
use home or CDBG or federal home loan bank
Okay.
or whatever other sources that we pull in.
You had scenarios where you got multiple offers and then somebody is below that 25% housing ratio and you have to select.
Yes, so we did,
Someone
we talked a little bit yesterday about our selection policy, and but I didn't mention that, and that's an important one, is that everybody has to be within the affordability threshold of, that it's not like, over 33% of their income, right? We want that. But we would look at it if we had 5 people and, 4 of them were going to be paying 18% of their income, and then the other one was going to be paying 26%, We recognize, like, okay, we serving the person who needs it most, meaning that that person who's paying 26% of their income can't afford much more of a house, where these other 4 people could afford more of a house, even more of a land trust house, a more expensive house. So it's kind of funny to think about, but we also do try to factor that in when we're selecting folks. Most everybody falls in the range where they're between 20 and 30%. Like that's just, it's pretty rare that somebody's above or below that. But, no. One quick thing on this topic about realtors. And I think I'll go to appraisers and then back to realtors. But so you can see the dilemma with, well then, once we got on the MLS, which the multiple listing service is to and I'll talk about the realtor partnership in a bit, but what price do we put on the MLS, right? And so, again, people would have to work this out differently. But we also developed early on, speaking of partnerships, a good partnership with the Duluth Area Association of Realtors, which is now the Lake Superior Area Association of Realtors. We recognize, and I'll talk about some of the mistakes we made, but that we wanted to reach a more broad, marketing of our homes. And so what we talked with them about what we wanted to do, and explained the issue with the land trust price and then actually have to sell it from market value. And so what they said, well, yes, we get that, it makes sense why you want to have it be on the MLS for low price. Because they said, well, you could put it at the 150 and then like in the notes say, $50,000 of affordability gap to qualified buyers, but who looks at the notes? So they hardly anybody, right? So, and I know because when you realtors will call, like, it's in the notes, it says right there. Anyway, but so we said, okay, we're gonna list it at $100,000. I said, but when we do the purchase agreement, our funders require at closing disclosure says 150. That's what's going to be reported to the county auditor at the sale. It'll say 150. So can I put then when I close out the MLS, can I put in 150? And she's like, no, because that's going to mess up our thing. It's going to indicate like you got the house for $50,000 more than you listed it for, and then that's going to skew their MLS numbers. And I was like, well, I understood that. So we just settled on this agreement where the MLS would just be the land trust price, and that's what it would say. And then, but what would be reported to the county for what the actual sale was the higher price. And as a result, this is the trade-off of everything, is, I've gotten a million appraisers who are like, I'm trying to do these comparables, I'm looking at one of your houses, and it says this here, but in the county records it says this, what's the difference? Like, okay, here's the deal, so, I've had a million of those conversations, and that's the trade-off to present our homes in the way. And, and that's where, some folks are like, get it, not worth it, it's too much to figure out, And then it is if you don't care about affordable housing, right? If you don't care about getting low, moderate income people into ownership, then it's too much to figure out. But there just aren't other great ways and that I've certainly seen that work as effectively.
Did you say you do end up putting it on the MLS at the higher value or the lower?
The lower.
At the lower, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what our realtor partners are pushing back on us about.
Yeah.
That is skewing the data.
Right. And so we just tell people, don't use the land trust properties as comps when you're doing it. Don't use them because that's not reflecting the true market value. And we're like telling them, which is kind of like, well, that's the whole point of the MLS, so that I can use it as a comp. Like, well, in this case, if you see one roof community housing as the listing agent, don't use it as a comp. So yeah.
Are you always the listing agent for your homes? Because we use an external realtor,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's my first question.
Yeah, we are, and I'm trying to, I'll have to say enough to answer the completely understandable questions people are asking, even though we do have a whole separate session tomorrow on realtors, but still, I can't really answer without explaining a certain amount of it. So One Roof, when we started, we just got the gym, and we
At the library.
at the library, yes, in the green room, and so when we did our first homes, remember this Lake Superior College partnership, there's your quiz, and then we also then partnered with a modular builder, because we didn't have any capacity, which had the wonderful name of Easy Housing, and maybe they should have given us pause, but anyway, so it still worked out, so we then started to have more homes available than we were used to because of this partnership with modular. We could, now we look 10 homes or something, right? And we got to get the word out. How do we do that? And we did some research. We realized that if we were the owner, the builder and the owner, we could be a limited broker, at least in Minnesota. I'm not sure how it works in other states. And then we could list them on the MLS as a limited broker, meaning we couldn't list anything that we didn't own, so we couldn't represent buyers or anything like that. But our own Northern Queensland Land Trust houses, we could list. And so we did that. Made a bunch of mistakes. We'll tell you about. I'll tune in tomorrow. But then, of course, what happened was some of our homes that we developed started to resell. And we're like, oh, we can't represent them, the seller, as a limited broker. So what are we going to do? And then we learned that if you had been a limited broker for 5 years and you had done at least, 30 transactions or something, you could become a full broker. So lo and behold, Jeff's like, Jim, how about being a full broker? I'm like, what? Real estate broker? Like, no, I don't know. I just help people. What? Nope, sorry, buddy. That's what we need to do.
Taking the test in 3 months.
So I became a real estate broker, and out of necessity, and then that allowed us to list our resales as well. And then we were just a full broker, meaning I could list any property in Minnesota. We choose just to do our own. In Osborne, when we talked about, they do it a little bit differently, but so we just limit ourselves to the land trust properties we wanted to. In a way, there's already enough confusion that we figure okay, if I start doing other homes, they see One Roof community housing and market rate homes that aren't land trusts, wait, what is going on? I thought One Roof was just the land trust. And then there's plenty to do with just the land trust anyway. So
the reason you do that is that to reduce the realtor fees, to make it more affordable, so there's less of a gap?
No, it's because there's going to be realtor fees, so we might as well pay ourselves rather than somebody else. And that was a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Because our first instinct was exactly what you just said, like, well, then we won't have to have realtor fees, so.
Yeah.
But then, what if the buyer is working with a realtor?
Yeah.
So what we did, I'll spill the beans, you'll all hear it again tomorrow, but one of the great classic mistakes we made was in these first, homes that we were listing, we were first developing this relationship with realtors, and we had this marketing that said, sale price 100,000 or 107 if you're working with a realtor, which made perfect sense to us. Like, well, we gotta pay the realtor. But then of course the realtors were like, what? No, you can't do that. Like, you can't say it's gonna cost you more to buy this house if you work with a realtor. Like, well, really? Okay. So, and that began a long series of trying to understand and work with and say, okay, I had, particularly probably with any group more than any other, I had to get over my baggage around realtors and, as, predatory people who just want to make a killing and take advantage of people, right? That sort of bias that, you can come in with. And realizing that they are also an essential partner in affordable housing if we approach it correctly. And then I find myself, I'm a realtor, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how did this happen? So, and we've had great relationships with realtors, and we've had some challenges with some, which we'll get into tomorrow. But so, again, all of this evolved over time. So it wasn't as if we had, it was all, in the year 2000, we had it all mapped out perfectly. It was, each step that we took, like, we want to grow and expand. Now this raises this opportunity, but then it creates this dilemma, and, we're continually addressing that. Any other quick things on realtors? Well, so I guess a couple of things I'll say on realtors. So now we are a full broker, and so I want to keep track of time here. We created One Roof Community Realty, is our brokerage, keeping everything under one roof, as we like to say, and Joanna then also has her realtor's license, so under my brokerage, One Roof Brokerage, we had a couple other staff persons, do it over the years to do that. And so we always have this delicate question where, particularly when One Roof is developing a house for the first time, we're the listing agent, that's clear, it's our own project, and nobody questions that. When a land trust homeowner resells, oftentimes, and totally understandably, especially if they worked with a realtor, their own realtor, to buy the land trust house originally, then they're like, oh, I'll call my realtor friend who helped me buy it, and they can help me list it. And we had to make a decision, like, well, what are we going to do in that scenario? And what we settled on, because it's legally the right, safe path, was you do not have to use One Roof Community Realty to list your home, right? You have the choice of any realty company in Minnesota that does it. That's your right. That being said, nobody understands the land trust better than we do, and if you do use another realtor, what you still have to comply with is all of the land trust program requirements. So it's not like you can use another realtor and then just list it on the market and it's all unrestricted. You still have to sell it to an income qualified buyer, you still have to have the resale formula, you still have to go through all these steps and processes, right? So, and that's kind of how we framed it, and that's worked very well because most realtors also be like, they say, yeah, I don't want to figure that out. I don't want to have to figure out the land trust program. It's not worth it. I can represent the buyer of the house. I don't need to also try to represent the seller. And that's, because I think for two reasons is any professional wants to feel competent in what they're doing, right? And so realtors, they want to represent their clients well and feel like they have the competency and the skill to be worth the money they're being paid to do this. And if they don't really know what they're doing with the land trust listing, they don't like that, of course, right? And so we've had a couple, one or two maybe, where we've listed it with another realtor and we still have to be behind the scenes, like doing all the work, and it's like, and then, they get paid as a listing agent and we did most of the work anyway. If that starts to become a huge issue, that'll be the next thing we have to do. But to date, we say, yep, you can use one ref to list, it's, and then of course, that land trust home seller is using a private realtor to buy the next home, right? So we never represent them unless they're buying another land trust home, which has only happened a couple of times in their new purchase. So we still try to spread out the wealth, so to speak, and that way we've maintained a good relationship with the realtors in that regard. But it has helped, I think, for them to see like, okay, yeah, you have this niche that you're serving, and I'm cool with that because you're not going to take my high-end $250,000, $500,000 clients away from me, right? That's fine, So, and the other positive thing that's been neat for working with realtors is they've recognized when they're representing buyers, like, this opens up more possibilities to my buyer than I had before. In fact, I might get a deal out of this that I couldn't have gotten because my buyer had no other options really to buy a house under the land trust program. Hey, this is pretty good, I now work with this client population who I like. There's lots of realtors who like working with those first-time buyers, and there just aren't a lot of options out there. So then now, the realtor's calling me, hey, what do you have coming up? I got a client who's perfect for land trust, something I would never have imagined 20 years ago, where I felt more intimidated by it, and all right, there'll be more on realtors tomorrow, but yes.
In a resale situation, is the commission calculated on the market price or the land trust price?
The land trust price, yes, correct, good. And to that point, you put it in there on the purchase agreement, commission based on land trust program price of $150, right? So, because early on, a couple of times.
So you let realtors know that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I was going to say I know you're talking about tomorrow, but
Yeah.
if you're not a realtor or brokerage, how do you think it's, because we're reaching out to realtors.
Yeah.
And now I feel like we're already messing up because we shouldn't say that right up with that. But like, did you try to get people to list it for like a set price? Because you do all the work anyway to get it to closing. I mean, is that offensive to them to say?
I'm not sure I'm following. You mean
Well, to list our new homes, because we're not.
because you can't listen, yeah.
Yeah. And flyers on the wall.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not.
Right.
We feel we need to be on the MLS.
Yes,
So.
yes. So one thing that helped in that scenario is because I listed it on the MLS for the lower price, like we say, commission is based on the MLS price of $100,000. In that sense, like, well, yeah, of course, that's commission is based on the MLS price. That's how it works, So that fit perfectly, because it would be harder is if the MLS was the 150, but we're only paying commission on the 100. So at least there's that continuity that made it easier to clarify. Yeah.
How significantly did being your own brokerage contribute to the sustainability of the CLT?
A lot. Yeah, it's huge. And Jeff's probably talking about that next door. And Jeff coined the phrase, I think, for one rep, of being spiritedly entrepreneurial, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can become a strictly profit-driven organization and lose track of your mission, right? So you have to be careful of that. But there's also a sense of, look, we're going to have to pay for certain services. Are there some of these that we could do ourselves? We have to pay for it anyway and pay ourselves and probably do the services better, right? Yeah. So that's part of where we did our own construction company, and definitely with the realty. So we originally thought, yeah, let's just not have realtor fees, because again, it seemed like we have to keep the price low. But you don't say, well, let's not have a furnace because we're going to keep the price low. So once I shifted to this is just the cost of doing business, you did just you get nobody says like there should be no closing costs on your mortgage, like, oh, you gotta pay $8,000 in closing costs. You're like, okay, well then we'll factor that in. So it's kind of the same way. I just had to get over that mindset of, it just seemed like, this extra cost we shouldn't have to pay. And so then once we said, okay, we're gonna pay it, and then once we started paying it and we learned our mistakes, learned from our mistakes, then we were like, great, I get the same commission on land trust home as I would anybody else, so yeah. Because early on, there were some folks like, we're not gonna show these properties because they don't pay commission, we'll pay a finder's fee. I don't do this for $100 or whatever. But we talked about, what if we could get deals and we could have it, blah, 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 and then we just realized, just pay the darn commission. Yeah.
So that's kind of something that we've been experiencing issues with. We have realtors in our community that actively turn buyers away from buying a CLT home or even selling their home to a CLT. And so especially in the early days, how did you educate realtors and combat some of those myths surrounding CLT homes?
One thing that we did, and it was a little daunting, but we made appointments to go to the major realtors associations. And they always have their Tuesday agent meetings at 10 a.m. or whatever, and we say, hey, can we come in and talk about the land trust program and explain how it works and what we do? And that was very helpful because we could have some honest, because there was a lot of misunderstandings and well, if we show the home, you're going to take our client away from us, and so then we lose out, and then why should we do all this work and then you get it? Like, we're not going to take your client from you. you keep your client, but so but like, it's just such a cliche, but like nothing works like success. So once realtors started to represent our buyers, get paid, see that the homes were really well cared for, and see that we knew what we were doing, that we were competent and capable and a good partner, they were like, oh, you know what? That was easier than all my other realty transactions this year that I had in the open market, but the best advertising was a realtor telling another realtor that. Like, I could tell them that and be like, well, yeah, you work for the land trust, of course you're going to say that. But then when somebody in their own brokerage says, oh no, I did a deal with Jim, it was great, everything was smooth and easy, it was super helpful, any questions I had, and they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe I could do that, So, but it took time, and us then, being on the MLS, becoming our own broker, starting to go to some of the brokers' meetings, just getting my face and name out there, and but also, we made a decision not to cross into their turf, so we stayed in our lane, and I think that's helped in that regard too.
So maybe we'll be talking about this, but attorney representation on the buyer's side and the buyer's realtor, what's your experience with that as far as how that's gone?
Yeah, attorney representation, do you mean like in drafting the purchase agreement or in what?
In our program, we require them to meet with an attorney. We don't have realtors involved yet, we will be soon. So really that attorney is kind of acting like a buyer's agent in some ways.
Yeah. Our only involvement with attorneys is we require that the buyer review the land lease with an attorney prior to closing, but that's the only time an attorney comes onto the scene, other than the title company as an attorney reviews it, but we don't. They're all of our clients. They have a buyer's agent, and this is another. I feel like I'm cutting into too much of tomorrow, but another we have to be clear when they apply to us, and this was a tension point, understandable. We would say, do you have a realtor? Are you working with a realtor? No, I don't work with anybody. Okay, so if you want to, one community realtor can represent you, or you can use anybody. It's clear, you can use anybody you want, but if you want to, you can work with one rep. Yeah, I'll work with one rep. And then sometimes we find out, I haven't worked with a realtor. Like, oh, well, I didn't sign anything. Of course, that's the thing, which is almost always true. Frequently, they don't sign buyer's agent contracts. They just show them homes, and then and technically that's the buyer's agent's mistake. That's not our problem. But in those circumstances, again, to keep the relationships positive and to not damage, put it over $4,000, we'll say, oh, sorry, she told us it wasn't wearing the realtor, didn't read you realize you were. Sometimes if I am feeling pushy, like, yeah, just send me your buyer's agent contract and we'll send you, we don't have that, but generally, again, just, of people of trust them at their word, like, okay, so then, a few times we paid them the commission, the buyer's agent commission, even though we did everything. And, that suddenly, oh, okay, this is decent folks who keep, we always have to, because buyers, of course, there's no reason, they don't understand agency and realty and how it all works, and so, like, well, if somebody showed me some houses, and like, okay, who, when, who's the realtor, and so then, well, then you should go stick with so-and-so, and well, I don't really like that person, and okay, did you tell them you don't want to see them, like, end that relationship, because we just have to be really clear about that. So, so we capture 100% of the listing commissions, and then somewhere, 40–50% of the buyer commissions. And actually, while it would be more financially beneficial if we captured 100% of the buyer's commission, I think overall it's actually better that we don't, because then we have this broader relationships with the realtor community, and I think that's been a good, healthy thing. So, all right, if you're like, there's so much more I want to know about realtors, you can come tomorrow, because Osborne's going to share about City of Lakes and what they do too. So, with the time, I want to talk a little bit about appraisers and title companies. 15 minutes here. So, we also got lucky with the appraiser, when I mentioned that we had that long time partnership with North Shore Bank. So back in 1996 or whatever, we did the first one. They had a kind of a newish appraiser they said, "What can you? I don't know. Can you figure out this land trust thing and do an appraisal?" "Oh, sure." So Steve's now been doing our appraisals for 30 years, and so they figured out, and I'm sure it's all on board with is the bank that for land trust transactions, if the buyer's purchasing a land trust home, they can assign the appraisal to this one appraiser who understands and gets community land trusts, right? And so they, rather than just kind of put it out there anyway. The bigger banks can't do that, U.S. Bank or so. When it goes through North Shore, we're always like, buyers are going to North Shore, this is going to be smooth and easy, and the appraisal is going to come through fine in a timely manner, it's going to be consistent every time, it's going to be great. And then when it's U.S. Bank, it's like, well, we don't know when the appraisal is going to happen, if it's going to happen, if he's going to appraise it the right way, if he's going to use the Fannie Mae methodology. And of course, they can't direct it, but they've gotten a little better at saying, okay, you have to at least have some familiarity with the land trust appraisal requirements, because they're different. And I know a lot of land trust folks have struggled with getting appraisers to do it, because we have this same issue where it's the market value and the land trust price. So there's those two things. But then there's this crazy number that I've hated for 25 years, which is the leasehold value, which is this Fannie Mae methodology, which in my opinion is pretty much arbitrary, but it takes the capitalization rate, which is chosen by the appraiser, and they can choose totally different rates, multiplied by your land lease fees, and then it comes up with spits out a number, and they subtract that from the market value, and they say, well, the market value is 150, the leasehold value is 142. But sometimes the leasehold value is 132, sometimes it's 130, sometimes it's 148. Like, it's just all over the place when you work with other realtors. And they also don't know, they confuse the leasehold value with the land value and with the market value anyway. So I had a lot of conversations with appraisers, and happily they can call me. They can't, they're not supposed to, of course, after all of the issues with 2008, they can't talk to the bank directly about it. But they can talk to me and say, okay, I'm appraising this property in your program. I think I got this right. This is how. And I say, no. They always start by saying, so I have to use only land trusts as comps. And I say, no. In fact, it says the opposite. It says, do not use land properties as comps. Like, oh, yeah, and I send them the Fannie Mae methodology because they're trying to establish the unrestricted market value. If there were no restrictions on this property, just a normal market rate property, what would it be worth? Well, they have to start with that. And they can't get that number if they're using land trust MLS numbers as comps, right? Well, I looked at the MLS and I looked at all the ones over yours because that's what I'm supposed to use. No, you're not supposed to use those. And so, again, it's educating the appraisers. And fortunately, we've had, now even with US Bank, we'll see some of the same appraisers come through, like, okay, good, it's this guy, he's done before, we're gonna be okay. But that's a constant headache of saying, A, don't use the MLS number, A, period. B, don't look for land trust properties as comps, because that's not the point. The point is looking at the neighborhood you're in, the normal way you would do it, what would this home be worth. Then once you've established that, you calculate the leasehold value. The reason why the leasehold value is a double headache is that's what's used to determine whether or not mortgage insurance is needed, right? So rather than the market value, they go by the leasehold value, which is always less. But if they use some different capitalization rate, their leasehold value might be $25,000 less. Well, now we're facing not possibly having to pay mortgage insurance because it's based off this lower number. So Steve, our appraiser from 30 years ago, has used the same capitalization rate the entire time. I know exactly how much the leasehold value is going to be every single time, and that's great. The other guys, it varies, and so the challenges are dealing with either they have the wrong comps, they have the wrong the way they structured it, or, which has happened several times, nothing happens for a month, and then they go, oh, this is a land trust? Yeah, I'm not doing this. And they send it back to the bank, and they said, oh, well, we just heard from the appraiser that actually they're not going to do it. We're really sorry, and we're going to have to order another one. And, so that's one of our favorite things. Anything else on appraisals before? And that's sometimes I guess technically wonky with leasehold value and then they'll say, well, that's the same as the land value. No, it's totally different. There's no relationship. The value of the land or the home is whatever you think that 50 by 150 foot lot is worth. It has nothing to do with capitalization rate and land lease fee and blah, blah, blah.
Did you ever run into issues with the banks having trouble understanding and accepting that the land value could be different than the affordability gap subsidy that is resulting in a lower land trust price?
We haven't because in Duluth, our land values were so low because we have all these old homes on tiny 25-foot lots in older neighborhoods. So they go, what's this 25-foot lot worth in this old neighborhood? I don't know, 5,000, under a house, So we knew right from the get-go that our affordability gap that was needed wasn't in any way going to match the land value. Like they're totally separate things. And so it's different in the Twin Cities. Like your land value might be 70 grand. Like you might actually, your affordability gap might only be 40 or something, So Duluth was a reverse, so our land values are very low, but the affordability gap the need was high. So we separated those two out from day one, and we never talk about them. Even though it's an easy, when other people talk about it, they'll say that. They'll say like, oh, so they take the land out, the value of the land functions as their down payment, or the value of the land is the affordability gap. I'm like, it's not, just they're not directly related. I mean, I get what they're trying to say, but it doesn't work out dollar for dollar. So it's better to try to correlate those. Ownership of the land, that's essentially the land trust model. Matching it up with the affordability gap, not essential, right? Okay, I think last maybe would be title companies, and I just want to say that I have a standing offer to work for our local title company. Anytime I want to leave the land trust, it's like, I get it now, I can look at title commitment and I understand this now, you know? And, which was totally foreign, I remember this first one, like, I have no idea what I'm looking at, honestly. And again, we had the relationships, I hate to, you know, it's so key, but again, when we were starting out, and so not, you know, so now, again, we're nobody with not much of an inventory, no history, no track record, no presence really, but Jeff has a good woo, if you know that term, right? And so he's a great way to connect with folks and get people excited about a vision. And so he met with the title company in Duluth and is the director, and she has been our biggest champion for 30 years. And in the early days, I remember some of the closers were like, "Oh, I gotta sign the land trust one," you know. They're like, "Dang it," you know, because it's like anything that seems harder was like, "Why do I do that?" But we won them over, right? Because it's the same thing. Like the title company, when people say, "I would love to do a land trust closing," because the buyers come in, they're so excited and it's happy and it's fun, and they tell stories about very contentious closings and market rate transactions, and you can't be in the same room, and all this drama and tension. And so, you know, we recognize that so you can have an awesome, you know, product, you can have it priced affordably, you can have a great relationship with the lender and the home inspection, which we didn't get into those yet, but, you know, it can be great. But if you can't clear the title issues, then you're sort of stopped at the end. You're like, why did I was so close, you know? And so really having a good title company contact who can help explain things to you and let me know, because there are just more documents and more things that show up on a title with a land trust property than a non-one. It's just the way it works, because we've got the land lease, we've got the lease rider, we've got our affordability gap agreement. If you have the city of Duluth home, then there's a restrictive covenant for that. If you have NSP, there's a restrictive covenant for that. And if you had you know, and if it's a resale, you've got all those, and then you have the subordination agreements for the restrictive covenant that has to be subordinated to the new buyer's mortgage. And so there's just, you get the list, and you can either go, no, or you're like, this is fun, right? I'm gonna go through each one of these, and we're gonna figure out what document we need to clear this title. And then, you know, you begin to understand, like, oh, okay, this is what clears this title. So this one needs a satisfaction, this one needs a subordination, this one needs a payoff. I bring these three, the bank brings these two, blah, 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 right? But having that partnership with both, we have the head, and I kind of have to regularly about things that come up, but also the closers, the kind of frontline folks that you're emailing 100 times back and forth. Okay, I need this document, I need the I&I certificate. Do you have this addendum to the purchase agreement? You're like, so again, it's a partnership and it's a team, and it's absolutely essential to our work, right? So, you know, we've chosen to use the same title company, primarily, exclusively Duluth, and we actually put in our addendum of purchase agreement. Closing will take place at Arrowhead after record title, right? And that was a choice. We wouldn't have to do that because traditionally the buyer chooses the title company. But we've said, hey, you know, Arrowhead gets the land trust. They've done all the title work for the property previously. Is this going to be clearer and smoother? They have to do it again. And then everybody goes, yeah, that sounds good. You know, so we haven't gotten much pushback from that. That being said, you know, you could have 5 different title companies you work with, and that's fine. But it just means you have to explain it to 5 different folks every time, which is more work.
So we had a local title company talk to us, interested in getting involved, but they were like, hey, what's the difference with the CLT title? So what would you tell them? We were like, well, we can look into it and get back to you. So.
Well, it's just way more interesting to understand the title. And, you know, the biggest difference is, okay, 5 minutes, is we've chosen that one of, you know, it's part of our mission, and, you know, people have very strong feelings. Ours is that we own the land, right? It's not a deed restriction. where the buyer gets the land, but then there's a deed restriction on it. It's we maintain ownership of the land. And that's how it's always been. So the title always remains the name of Northern Communities Land Trust or Monterey Community. So that is a constant language thing, because understand, people say, okay, so when you get title, get a copy of your title, when you have title, blah, 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 and I always have to say, well, the title to the land remains in the land trust name, but you have the ownership of the house, the improvements upon the land through these other mechanisms, through the land lease agreement, etc. So that is always a key. It'll say, warranty deed to Monterey Community Housing, and it won't say it to Jane Doe, right? But now they're used to seeing that. They know that, oh, this is a wonderful one. Yep. Okay, great. Let's do that. So that was the piece there. Any other title-related stories? Then maybe just with the last minute is just home inspections. Not too much to say other than, again, it's a partnership in the sense of we're not, like people be like, oh, the home inspector's trying to sabotage the deal. He's trying to ruin it, It's like, no, his or her job is to just go to the house, point out any defects and list them in order of severity, and then let the buyer decide what they want to do with it. So, ruin it. Then we've had times where we call an inspector, can you clarify this thing you called out? We see it differently in the code. We think the code is this. Oh, non-confrontational, and then that's great. We that dance I mentioned yesterday, where once we do that, and people think, oh, these are your inspectors. These are the one-roof inspectors, and they're not. And we could not give them any names, because then there's no risk of them thinking that they're a one-roof inspector. But then it feels like, do you have any inspectors you know of? Nope. Can't help you there. It's like, it just doesn't feel right. So, well, you can try to explain. Folks have used, but you're not limited to business. So, anyway, all right. So maybe we'll stop there and have a lovely half-an-hour break and enjoy the rest of your morning.